is the Yeah C'mon Show, show 146. I'm your host, Southside Steve. There's my co-host, Brett Barney, and there's my co-host, and it's one Evan Brandonicio. And we are your team, and we have a special guest. He's already there. You can see the name. It's Joseph Scott Morgan. You know what? Damn it. So I've got a nice intro, and I'd like to talk about you for a second, Joe, if you could just be quiet.
The Zoom does kind of, ruin the suspense and the surprise. Yeah, just a little bit, right?
Yeah, the in-studio was way better when it was just us, and then all of a sudden it came to a new camera angle, and there's somebody else just sitting with us.
So you now know we have a guest. You know his name, but you may not know who he is. So joining us today is one of the leading experts in the coroner system in the United States, who specializes in many things, including estimating the time of death, injury assessment, and mass fatalities. That's got to be a tough one, and much more. He began his journey in New Orleans, becoming the senior investigator with the Fulton County Medical Examiner office right here in Atlanta. He's appeared on HLN, CNN, Sirius XM, Fox, Nation, and more. And currently the Yeah C'mon podcast. He was named Georgia Author of the Year. His memoir, Blood Beneath My Feet, The Journey of a Southern Death Investigator. He's the associate professor who's applied forensics at Jacksonville State University in Alabama, where I think he currently is. And he has nearly half of the alphabet following his name as far as degrees and things. I'll read off letters that mean nothing to me based on a 2-year educational process at Georgia State University. MFS, FABMDI. That's who he is. It's something like that. I'm saying it's a master's in, I guess, an FABMDI. We'll find out what that is. He's also the host of a podcast called Body Bags. Now, that's a hell of a name. It's my pleasure to welcome, as you read, Joseph Scott Morgan onto the Yeah C'mon Show. Joe, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, come on, baby. What's going on, Steve? Good to hear you, man.
Nothing. You know what's great is Joe and I met at Headline News. We were both going on Headline News. He was going to talk about murder investigation, and I think I was coming on to talk about the Super Bowl, I think is what I was doing at the time.
Was that when my girlfriend mic'd you? I bet that was when Corinne mic'd you up. Yeah. So yeah, and your girl, Evan's girlfriend, mic'd me up and got real touchy-feely with me, Joseph. I don't know about you. I didn't think that.
I'm like, why is the cord going up my pants leg?
Hey, all right.
Around my genitalia and then up to my neck. Is it necessary? No, I'm kidding.
Corinne, is it necessary?
Is it, Corinne?
Oh, she's in the room?
She's here. She's looking at
she's
me right now.
It's the industry standard.
She said it's industry standard. So
thank
you.
Thank you. No, she was fantastic. And as you know firsthand, Joe, the people over at Headline News, they're my favorite because
they are.
Regardless of which one you listen to, CNN or Fox, they're dead center.
Yeah.
They're giving us the news the way we remember it. Where
at HLN,
where opinions are left out and they just do the news. And to me, that is just absolute pleasure. I love Susan Hendricks over there, and then Chloe Milas, who's on CNN as an entertainment reporter, also on Headline News. Those two people I've worked with, along with Corinne, Evan's better half, God bless him. So that's where we met, and we talked briefly, and you let me know that you had listened to the regular guys back in the day here in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I got to tell you, man, I was reflecting on it today. When you're an ME investigator, which is what I was, you work rotating shifts just like anybody else in public safety. And there was a clutch of us back then, all these guys with letters after their names, essentially, which, by the way, that and $1.80 will get you a cup of coffee at Waffle House. And so we were,
Hold on, you hit it. You hit it. Just tell us what those letters mean real quick.
Yeah. MFS is Master of Forensic Sciences. And then the FABMDI means that formally I was a fellow of the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators, which is a national certification for death investigation. It's not, people think of death investigation generally in the terms of homicides, but for people in my field, which is called medical legal death investigation, we investigate all manners of death. It's not, police their sole focus is primarily homicide, but there's 5 manners of death. So we investigate suicides, accidents, undetermineds, naturals, and of course, homicides. We're involved in all of it. And so, we're left with a lot of the dirty jobs that nobody else wants, and spend a lot of time crawling underneath buildings with bodies that are maggot infested, and, having to go tell families about deaths, and dissecting bodies and trying to determine manner and cause of death and who they are. And, it's if you're a science guy, it's a fascinating field to be in, and that was kind of the genesis for me. I'm curious by nature, and you kind of have to know, where the guardrails are in your profession to not slide too far over into law enforcement, because they have a separate job than what, we have. We're there. We're not to bring, everybody throws around the word justice. I'm not interested in justice. That means nothing to me. I'm interested in determining what happened, and that's it.
Well, did you grow up watching Quincy? Because the lines were blurred with that guy. Quincy was
they really were. Hey, an interesting story. Sam and Quincy, who is the Japanese guy that's
Robert
his assistant.
Right?
Yeah, I believe so. That the character of Quincy is actually based upon a guy named Tom Noguchi. And if you guys get a chance to check this book out, there's a book called Coroner at Large. I think Tom's dead now, but he was a Japanese American, and I think was actually in an internment camp, and wound up being the chief medical examiner the coroner/chief medical examiner for LA. And he's called the coroner to the stars. And he did the autopsies on Marilyn Monroe, Sharon Tate. He was actually at the La Bianca Tate murder scenes, both of them. You name it. He did Belushi. He did all of those cases, and he was a fascinating cat. But Sam in Quincy is based upon Tom. And so they decided to bring Klugman in to make him Quincy. Yeah. So it was always fascinating to me, that little hook there, apparently, in that world.
He is still alive. He is 95 years old.
All right.
Yeah. And a good actor, man. Good actor. There you go.
That's cool. Very cool. And getting back to what you were saying, and I want to bring up a lot of the things that you're into. By far, one of the most interesting guests we've ever had on the Yeah C'mon show. And you were kind of leading that. You were a small group of guys, but you listened to morning radio to me on 96 Rock back in the day.
We did. And what was really cool is that, in the morning in particular, look, I'd either catch you when I was leaving to go home. And another South Side guy, actually, I graduated from high school in Griffin, Georgia. And so, and, but the cool thing about it was I'd either catch you on the way home or I'd work day shift, and there was a clutch of us that would sit around and have you on the radio. And we would have now listen to me very carefully. We would come out of one of the darkest meetings you can possibly come out of. Every day you had what were called morning rounds, and all of the cases that were generated the night before, suicides, homicides, accidents, everything that was to be autopsied that day, everybody would have gotten together and heard about all this murder and mayhem and destruction and everything. And then we'd come out and we would flip the radio on, and it was always you guys. And so it's like, as wild as you guys were, as wild as you guys were, you would like flip the switch in us magically, and we would always laugh. And it's a tough world, because nobody can really, not even the most hardened police officer can really identify with the stuff that we deal with in our world, because there's no getting kitty cats out of trees. There's no finding lost children. It's death day in and day out in all its different forms. So you guys were really, and I'll tell you one story in particular that just cracked us up for so long, and it has to do directly with you. And that's the time that they sent you to the Philadelphia Eagles game. And you took the tape deck with you. Yeah. And you wore the shirt, and you were up in the stands. And for us, we were just, laughing our asses off collectively, over that. And it was just one of the many things. And it was just hilarious to us.
I was almost on your table. I was almost killed.
Exactly. So, but so we've got a history, whether you know it. I'm sure you got a history with a lot of people you might not know about, but you really impacted us in that little space.
Well, you know, and to do the kind of radio we were doing then, and obviously it's changed. Currently doing radio now, two guys on my podcast are no stranger to being on the air, whether it was News 106.7 or currently 99X and Rock 100.5. So I grabbed two eager, hungry guys that I thought had a skill set. So you're surrounded by radio people. We all have our moments. We've all done some stuff, that's for sure. But that was a great stunt going to Philadelphia wearing all Falcons clothing in the 700 section where blue collar meets nobody goes up there and wears. The only way you can wear another team is if you are in a suite or maybe you got like great tickets. You get up in the 700 section, that's home seats, man. They'll kill you.
Yeah, they have their own. They had their own police precinct. So that was amazing. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. But I got a lot of love that night just for having the balls. I got called a lot of names, had a few beers poured on me, but then I went out to the bars afterwards and they were pretty cool. So it was a fun night. But again, I want to thank Brett Barney, who I know has a connection with you, for getting you on. Brett worked for Nancy Grace for a long time. Again, Brett and Evan, if you're listening to the Yeah C'mon Show podcast, these are very competent, quality guys that are great writers, good research guys, good on the air. And to me, I couldn't have a better team on my podcast. But I knew that he had worked with you through Nancy Grace. And again, you know, I want to bring up the fact that true crime and serial killers right now is probably the most popular topic based on some of what's going on. I mean, look at Dahmer. It's on Netflix, and there's 56 million households right now in America watching that. My wife's one of them. I literally went in the room and she's watching Dahmer before I even came down here. That's
finished it last night, baby.
Yeah. So you finished it. So, you know, and we all know what happened, but we don't know.
I was about to say, don't spoil it, but like,
yeah.
I got it. I think I kind of know what happens.
but there's details. And I guess I want to start it in having you on. And again, you're a go-to guy for headline news and you're a go-to guy for a lot of people. And I'm going to assume that you're probably one of the best at what you do, which is, to me, is looking at a body and knowing how long it's been deceased. You know, you're at this, you know, you're at a scene, how mass fatalities, to look at that, to understand what's going on. Injury assessment, I know, is a huge deal. What was the blow that killed it? Was there other things that happened prior to? And estimating the time of death is just the most fascinating thing that you guys probably are within 30 minutes every time of saying when somebody passed 30 minutes.
That's very flattering of you to say, but I never tighten it down that much. There's certain little fine tunings that we can do. Generally, most of the time, the closest I've ever got just coming in cold is generally about 2.5 hours. There's a lot of science and there's a lot of good luck that are brought to bear in what's called PMI, postmortem interval assessment, is kind of the $10 title that they put on it, but it's a time since death. That postmortem interval, how long have the individuals been dead? And of course, time, I guess, is the biggest asset that we have as medical legal death investigators, because look, you even think about, there's a TV show and it's been around for years and years called The First 48. And, the first 48 is kind of a macro version of that. You think about, they say you get beyond that 48-hour period and you start to lose information. We thrive off of information. So, and that works in my world too. The closer that we can come in getting to the body, post-mortem, that is those moments when life has faded, and begin to conduct our measurements, whether it's body temperature, the level of rigor mortis, or the settling of blood, which is called postmortem lividity, and judging the position of things and see if it jobs. It's like, if what somebody is telling us at the scene, I saw this guy, maybe 4 hours ago. That's what they're telling the cops. But yet the guy's got fully developed rigor mortis in the jaw and the arms. He's lying, because scientifically that's improbable that you would have fully developed rigor mortis, or that postmortem lividity, which is the pooling of blood, is settled in a particular area and it's fixed. You can't blanch it out. That they're lying, because that's going to take probably about 8 to 10 hours for it to set. So those are the little nuances that you're looking for along the way. And probably out of that whole group, the one thing that people talk about the most is body temperature, and it's probably the least reliable because it's so heavily dependent upon what the individual is doing prior to death. They might have, if they have coke or meth on board, where their metabolic activity is going to be up. And we know in 7th grade physical science, we learned that heat speeds things up. It same applies in death. That antemortem activity, somebody's being chased by the cops, they're hopped up on some kind of stimulant, or they have a fever, for instance, and they die. Well, Riger's going to set, body temperature is going to change relative to that, and plus the environmental effects. So I'm very reliant on the settling of blood because it's gravitationally dependent. I don't mean to go down into depth with this, but that's just that's just the world that we live in, and that's kind of one of the things that we study. And now I don't have to do it; I just talk about it and teach my students at a collegiate level, and I still teach at police academies and all that sort of thing. So I have great fun doing that.
Well, that's great, man. Tell me you at least don't try to influence your students politically. I got to ask the question. You don't, do you? Like all these other professors, please God.
No, I don't. No. And listen, and death is apolitical.
Death is apolitical. That's
true. Death is completely, and it's a great equalizer. It always has been. And, I was telling students the other day, I participate in over 7,000 autopsies, and a rich man's bowels smell just as foul as a poor man's bowels when you get them open on the table. And really, that smell, when you open the body up, it doesn't vary. It really doesn't. And so death is, in fact, a great equalizer, no matter where you go, who you talk to. And look, you can go out and let the guy at the funeral parlor sell you that $25,000 titanium casket, but you're still as dead as a guy that's in the pine box or it's just buried in a hole out in the piney woods somewhere. You're still dead. And it doesn't change that fact. And there's nothing you can do to get past it. Some people think that there is, but there's not.
No, there's fun questions. Like I would want to have you picked out the person that you want to do your autopsy? Is there like somebody, a coworker?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
That's a really good one.
Like one of your students,
or like a celebrity.
I like the autopsy as if he's gonna get murdered for sure. So,
well,
it'll be a mystery.
No kidding. I make sure that my health records are very well documented. That way, there's still questions when I die. And that's a tough one. There's an old kind of anecdotal story that floats around about an old pathologist that hated his wife and she died, not by his hand, but he actually wound up doing her autopsy. And that apparently has actually happened a few times.
That's brutal.
It really is. And, one of the things that really impacted me, and I talk about it in my memoir, is I actually wound up having to do an autopsy on a very close friend that died in a motor vehicle accident in New Orleans, because the other guy that assisted in autopsies was his best friend and fraternity brother and had graduated from college with him and had married this guy's cousin. And so he couldn't do it. And it scarred me to my core. I mean, that out of everything it's one of those moments in time in life where, you're young and you're stupid. I was probably about 24 at the time.
Oh my God.
You think you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof. And, I can do this, I can man up and do it. And I found out at the end, it really scarred me pretty badly.
Is it,
sorry to hear that.
Is that something you're like at the time, I'm sure horrifying. Is it something you're kind of like glad you did though? Like whether to,
No, it's not. No, because he and his, I'll put it to you this way. I'll set the story for you. He and his fiance were in, do you remember like the old 300ZXs or 300Zs, and they had T-tops?
Oh yeah.
They were on a cloverleaf on I-10, and they straightened out the cloverleaf, flipped it, ejected, and they both died. And this was the week after Memorial Day, 1989, maybe. And I had been at a mutual friend's home with them, having hot dogs and beer by their pool the week before.
Yeah.
And so, it was just one of those things, it's like really brutal, but there was literally no one else we could call to do this at the time, so you're just put in that position sometimes.
No, totally. I guess I was just wondering more like the intimacy of it, right? Like
it is. Well, the pathologist that I was working with, what he said to me, he says, wet some towels and put them over their faces.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering, if you covered his face.
Yeah, I did, but you still wind up having to open their head. And one of the things that happens when you open a head, you always hear it in the movies, that high-pitched buzzing sound.
Yeah.
It's an agitating saw. It's called a striker saw, and it's like a cast saw. It's the same principle. And during that period of time, I still to this day, I remember opening my friend's skull, and when you do that, you create the bone dust lifts up into the air. It's almost like if you take like baby powder and puff it like that, and you'll see that kind of histamine.
Yeah.
And you smell it, don't you? Well,
yeah,
that's the thing. As I opened my friend's head, you could smell the bone dust. And in that moment in time, I kind of inhalated, part of that essence of him. And that's one of the things that scars you.
Yeah.
And I think that people don't really understand that, what we're involved in and kind of what we do. And, we kind of see those things that other people kind of turn away from. But now, back to what Steve was saying, people are all the more curious about it. They can't get enough of true crime.
Yeah.
They can't get enough of forensics. They more and more all the time.
Yeah. It's how has that changed your industry, or has it at all? Do you see like students, for instance, being, kind of different because of that sort of like surge in popularity?
Yeah. We've always kind of had hangers on.
Mm-hmm.
I was part of a national study many years ago, a guy that was like a mathematician. He was a statistician that studies occupations. And he did a study with us, with people in my field. There's only about 600 of us nationwide. And he said,
really?
The job before us, he had studied the workers at Steelcase that made desk. And he said, I've studied a lot of industries. He said, you're the first one I've come across that has groupies. He said, because people follow you, people want, and this is back before the days of social media.
Mm-hmm.
You would not believe how many people ask, can I come to an autopsy? I want to come to an autopsy. They want to come to an autopsy all the time. And they kind of follow you. And it's groupies, not in like a weird sexual sense. It's just that people want to be around death.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that is. I guess they, want to check it out and see if it's,
if that could be right.
Yeah, it is. And most people don't get a peek behind the curtain.
Well, it's one of those things to me, when you're thinking about what you're doing, and Brett, stand by. I want all the guys to ask you a couple questions, because it's so interesting. For me, I guess there's two things that would bother me horribly is the death of a child.
Mm-hmm.
Since becoming a father. I mean, when I was in my 30s and 40s doing all the crap you heard me on the radio, even though my brothers were having kids and stuff, and I'm around small kids, just didn't register until I had one. Now I've got two, a 5 and a 2-year-old. So I look at the mass shootings. I look at the school shootings where you go in and there's like 18, 19 kids, that have been shot, Sandy Hook, for instance, and you guys have to go in and see that. And the parents are wrecked and you're wrecked, and you see what these bullets have done to their precious little bodies. And you still have to go through all that. And I just imagine doing an autopsy on somebody in their 80s. You're like, all good. 80 plus, you lived life, man.
Right. You did it right.
Business as usual.
Yeah. 50s, hey, you went a little early, but my God, you weren't a virgin and you had a couple of kids. Way to go.
There you go. Yeah.
But I think there's just ranges where, from 20 and down, it has to affect you. So I'd like for you to comment on that.
Yeah, Ken, it's, when you see lives that are snuffed out and you don't, you feel, obviously the dead, I don't think really care if you feel sorry for them or not. But, when you go out and make notifications, which is one of the jobs that we did, contrary to what you see on television where some cop shows up, it's generally us because we have the bodies and we're the contact person to find out about the bodies, and we're trained to do that. And I think at the end of my career, I've done like close to 2,000 in person. And so you go out and you make contact with families, you track them down, or if they're in another state, you find another public safety agency to go out and have the family call you while they're standing by with them, because you don't know what's on the other end of the line. Somebody might have a heart attack, and people have had that. And I've had all kinds of stuff happen to me when I do notifications. I've been slapped, punched. I had a lady bite my legs, bite my ankles. I had a lady start dancing and celebrating, telling me she was off her cross in this life, and it's the range is amazing. But when it comes to kids, the first notification I ever did centered around an 18-year-old girl in New Orleans that died as a result of being struck by a drunk driver. And that was actually my first weekend that I ever worked by myself, and I caught 34 cases my first weekend. Those aren't all homicides. It's just, it's that wide. Well, look, we were at that time, our little shop that we had, there were only 3 investigators. And so people don't stop dying. And so that's every kind of death. That's natural death, suicides, and suicides outnumber homicides 2 to 1 probably. And then you have accidents, unexplained deaths. So you're just kind of hopping from one death to the next, and then you got to get the families notified. And I still see the house, in my mind's eye, to this day, walking up to the door at about 1:15 in the morning. And knocking on the door, you see the lights come on, and it's a typical kind of, not a classic plantation style house, but it's got columns on the front of it, brick, big pitched roof like you see down in New Orleans, and it had gas lamps on the front of it. I'll never forget it, that were burning actual gas, that illuminated kind of this creepy glow. It's burned into your mind. And the dad coming down, you can see him coming down the staircase through the leaded glass, and he opens the door and you badge him, and, you got to tell them. And so that's what kind of, they might not know who you are, but they'll always remember your face. And it's not that this is anything special, trust me. It's just that moment in time when you engage with a family, I've equated it to, you're literally walking up to a stranger, pulling a pin on a grenade, metaphorically, and throwing it into a room and closing the door, because you just destroyed their life. I mean, you really have. And everybody will say, well, they'll pick up and they'll go on. There is no such thing as closure. It's one of the biggest bullshit words on the face of the planet. There is no closure when it comes to death. People always remember. It always impacts them. And Steve, the stuff you're talking about, when you're talking about little angels that get killed like that, there's no coming back from that. People are out of their minds. That's the reality that these people have to live with.
Yeah. And it's just the toughest thing in the world. And, and you watch just local news, you see the one where you're seeing the people that were taken prisoner in California. They were, guy goes in, they own a trucking company. They're foreigners. He zip ties them. You see them coming out, and you see that woman making sure she doesn't hit, walking down the steps, holding her baby. She's concerned about, make sure I'm walking, and they're walking to their deaths. And this guy's going to kill them probably, within 10, 15, and that little baby. And I don't even know how they died. I just saw it, and I tend not to read that kind of stuff. I just know they were all found in a field, and they're investigating, and the sheriff's old school, and he's like, there's a special place in hell for this guy. And I get that, but then you have to handle that. I guess with famous cases and you talked about a few with our friend, when I mentioned the Quincy show, La Bianca, that kind of, you see that, somebody that's a famous actress, a famous person, that has to be just almost difficult too. Have you done anybody famous that you don't have to give a name on? Have you done?
No,
that?
not necessarily, not as a practitioner. There were people that I have covered that no one would really know who they were in the public eye, but that were famously wealthy and that would know in certain circles, for instance. But
you might know what they did.
Yeah. Like, I hate this term, but captains of industry, for instance, people that founded certain companies, all those sorts of things, that's happened. However, where I've kind of gotten into this kind of celebrity thing, and I say gotten into it, it's not really by choice. It's by when media outlets call me. I don't know in recent memory if there has been any high profile case that I have not been called on, because of the kind of area that I dance in is very specific. Everything from, Anthony Scalia, when he died, to, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Robin Williams. All of these cases that I'll go in and review their stuff that's available and talk about on the news. I spent a lot of time working on Epstein, went to HLN. I can't remember her first name. Her husband is pitcher for the Braves, Pram. Anyway, she's a reporter at HLN. We spent an entire Sunday morning talking about Epstein, right like the Sunday after it happened. And I talked about the injuries to his neck. And it's amazing to me, because you don't really, it's like I said earlier about the rich. Of course, that can be, equated to famous as well. They're only famous because people make them famous. It's, they're the same at an elemental level. Trauma impacts them just like it does everybody else. And that's the thing, isn't it? Just because somebody dies and they're famous doesn't mean that their trauma is going to be any different. It's just that it's another lead for them to keep it in a news cycle for a little bit longer, and to just continue on with it. But, and, then there's infamy, because there are a lot of cases, Steve, like you were talking about just a second ago with this poor family out in California. I mean, that to me is, is far more compelling than some celebrity that ODs or hangs himself or whatever. I began to think about what these people endured. And it's really interesting. I think it says a lot about our society that there will be somebody else to replace that family in the news in the next couple of cycles. We won't hear about it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like this week on Body Bags, for instance, I break down the Eliza Fletcher, autopsy report, and go through it in detail. I happen to, like all of us did, I had access to it, and I try to use my podcast as like an educational platform, where, because people feel like they're talked down to a lot, and you can tell by my accent. I try to simplify things as if we're just having a cup of coffee, and I'm going to talk about the science, and that's what's so compelling about it. But, as tragic as Eliza Fletcher is, if you go to the trending section on Twitter, she ain't trending no more. You know what I'm saying? And her death is tragic. It's tragic. It's terrifying.
Nobody's running for her anymore.
No, they're not. And right now, for instance, in Georgia, we've been covering the Debbie Collier case, and we're all sitting back waiting for the autopsy to be released. The lady out of Habersham County was found down in the gully, and that's a huge mystery right now. Everybody wants to know, and that information will eventually come out, and it'll kind of, it'll fade, over time. And that's the nature of life, isn't it? When you think about, the people that pass on, the only people that really, at the end of the day, the only people that truly, truly care are the folks that actually love them, and
the rest of us, it's morbid curiosity.
It is. But the thing about it is the questions have to be answered. Somebody's going to ask them, and somebody's going to have to answer them. And right now, I just happen to be in a very fortunate position where people, for whatever reason, are turning to me and asking me for answers. And I don't always give the right answer. I screw up, periodically I've screwed up. But I just try to be as honest and true to the science as I can and not get caught up, in the political stuff. And there's enough people want to run their mouths about that crap anyway. Just try to talk about science. Science is more fascinating to me anyway, so.
Well, you just brought up your podcast, and I want to tell people where they can see that too. Real quick, I just want to thank our sponsors here for the Yeah C'mon podcast 146, and our special guest, Joseph Scott Morgan. We call him Joe Scott Morgan. And I just want to thank, first off, Ridgeline Counseling, Dr. David Markwell. He's a guy we work with, Joe, and he gave, matter of fact, marriage counseling to me. He offered it. I wasn't looking for it, but he's great. And now people Zoom that. People still don't even want to go face to face. But if you got problems, you talked about suicide. This is a kind of guy, regardless whether it's a marital problem or what, you need to talk to somebody. Ridgeline Counseling. How do you get a hold of him, Brett?
MarkwellTherapy.com.
That's what Brett does. I need him. A point.
Right here, baby.
Right here, baby. Then the other person we want to thank is Joe Bees, bee pollen, baby. Go to joebees.com to get your bee pollen. I take 2 capsules every morning. It works. Talk today on Rock 100.5 with Ted Jenkins of oxygenfinancial.com. Go to him for your financial needs. Right now, I don't know. Pot could be getting legalized in a few more states. Should you be buying marijuana? Possibly.
Got it. Steve said buy marijuana.
No, not buy marijuana.
You heard him.
Invest in marijuana companies that might, no, I don't. Dude, do I look like I drink? I have a drinking problem. Speaking of that, I got a problem drinking myself. That's it. Yeah, come on.
I hear you, baby.
I hear you.
There it is. Come on, bourbon whiskey. Available. All you got to do is go to Rock 100.5. You can click to find out where it's available, or spiritsusa.com. Click and it'll show you where it is. It's popping up everywhere, baby. And lastly, circle285.com. Quotes. insurance. About every 2 years, you should probably mix it up, make sure you're getting the best rate. I don't know whether you heard, if you're into politics, but in the state of Georgia, insurance is about to go up 8 to 10%. So get a free quote from Circle285.com. Again, this is show 146 and our special guest, Joseph Scott Morgan. You know, I guess in closing with my last question before I throw it to my co-host.
Yeah.
I look at what you do and I think it's the pictures, and I'm just going to be honest and transparent here. And I think everybody, you know, has their thing, but I remember I was caught up in a couple of accidents where two famous people died. One was JFK Jr. and the other one was Princess Diana. I know where I was when I saw it. And then I remember watching the show, and then forensics, a guy like you.
Okay.
You know,
Okay. Hang on. You were caught up in, meaning you were watching them.
Yeah.
Yes. Not involved.
Not like Steve was a potential suspect.
No,
he was the paparazzi.
I don't know.
What are you thinking?
The way it sounded, I was like, damn. All right.
Evan,
I don't know.
Evan, forward me your address so I can drive to your house and kick your ass and come back and do this podcast.
Hey, all right.
Come on. No.
Blunt force trauma.
That's it. Blunt force trauma. And then Joe will be like, it looks to me like Southside Steve kicked his ass. That's what happened.
But he's gonna boot up his ass. I don't know.
I am not in
let me extricate it for you.
Yeah, I was not in the tunnel chasing Princess Diana, nor was I like waiting for JFK Jr. to land, you know, and I'm like, where is he? So getting back to those, you know, you find out in her case, was she alive? Could she have been saved? Was there fault on the paparazzi? Could somebody have gotten rescue and helped her and saved her life? And then you got to figure that out. And then on JFK, this is where the morbid curiosity comes in. You're like, what does a guy look like when they finally found him? Because the identification had to be made by his uncle. When you've been underwater for 2 days strapped in to a cockpit. And I just don't know, does it still look like him, like we all look underwater, or has he already changed that much in 48 hours that he's not recognizable?
Well, you know, that's an excellent question. First off, when JFK Jr. crashed in, he would have died from literally, this is what it's referred to as rapid deceleration injuries. And what that means is that if he's, like you said, he's strapped in. So, and this is kind of fascinating, when you impact, and trust me, at that altitude and that speed, water becomes solid essentially. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you impact that surface, there ain't much give. But if you're strapped in, if you had like a cross belt like this, for instance, or even shoulder straps pinning you down and then across the waist, you're going to have this inertial energy that's going to transfer from the impact through the fuselage and through his body that will snap him back and then snap him forward. Now, what happens relative to this is that you think of your body as kind of all in one piece. It's not, because in impact like this, for instance, I'm talking internally, the heart itself can be ripped into where the big vessel comes off the top of the heart, called the aorta, and a lot of people die from that as a result of that impact. It literally rips, they'll bleed out in their chest. But in an aquatic environment like that, particularly in a saltwater environment, I worked a lot of cases like that. I started my career in New Orleans. The biggest thing that you have to worry about in that environment is not so much something like a shark, but crustacean life in particular. We had problems in New Orleans, for instance, in that environment. We'd pull bodies out of canals and out of the Gulf, or in the marshlands, not in the Gulf, and they would be covered in crawfish. Crawfish love human remains. Crabs, for instance, which they have up there. You got lobster up there. You got all these other things. So if the body is encased, you're going to be okay. There's a great image online. I'd urge anybody to go take a look at it. One of my favorite singers of all time, Otis Redding. I love 60s soul music. And there's a great image when they pulled Otis Redding out of the water. I think it was in Wisconsin. I'm not sure. You know, his body is completely intact. And I can't remember how long he was in there, but he's got, if you see him, he's strapped in the chair like this. He's still belted, and he's got what's called a frothy edematous cone coming out of his nose and his mouth, and that's an indication of drowning. So that gives you an idea that when he impacted, in Otis's case, he was still alive.
Damn.
And so he probably drowned while he was strapped into his seat. And they pull him out. You have the frothy edematous cone coming out. I know it's a very broad answer I gave you. I'm sorry, but there's a lot that goes into it. The trauma from the interior of the cockpit through the fuselage and how that impacts the body. And after 2 days, not a lot of changes. The water up there is particularly cold, so it's going to preserve the body. But if anything from the outside has had any opportunity to get to the body, it's going to change the appearance substantially.
Yeah, because you knew that, the two girls were there and everything, and you're like, he has this job. And I was just like, I wonder what that looks like. We all know, like with a helicopter crash or, some of the way a lot of famous people have gone out or anything like that, where there's fire.
Right.
I think we all have that in our head.
Right,
I think we all know the skeleton and what it looks like when it's burned. The other thing is, horribly, 9/11 showed us what it's like when somebody jumps 100 stories and how the body literally explodes. Is there at that point there is no need for you, is there? I mean, we know what's happened. There's nothing to work with.
Well, yeah, and I had a lot of friends that were on DMORT teams, which again a lot of people aren't familiar with. It's disaster mortuary operational response teams. It's federalized teams. Like, for instance, the DMORT team that responded to 9/11 was actually from the South, and it's made up of mortuary workers, medical examiners, forensic odontologists who are the dentists. We had anthropologists on the scene to look at bone, x-ray technicians, morticians, all these people. They go up and they're federalized and they're sent up there and they work ground zero. I had a lot of friends that were up there. And yet these Great Falls are horrible, and there's not a lot of need to do. At that point, you're looking for identification more than anything else. And that was one of the big problems that they had. And when those towers collapsed, and when they say collapsed, they literally mean collapsed on themselves. Just imagine a gigantic wedding cake. And, we've all, well, I guess most of us have been in New York, and if you ever went to the World Trade Center, there's a subway station below it. So you've got almost, I don't know how many stories. I know I'm going to get this wrong, 4 stories beneath the ground. So when this thing collapses, it's like a gigantic wedding cake that doesn't just go to street level. It continues on down. So you have commingling, which is what's referred to as remains, because you have remains that are being ripped apart, just torn apart, being commingled with debris. And all the while, the most horrific thing that my friends were telling me about is that there were all these little fires, and the little fires never stopped. No matter how deep you went, there were all these little fires that they were constantly having to contend with. And there's always this heat source. And we know what happens with heat. It speeds things up. And they had vermin to contend with. And then once they would remove that debris, they would take it out. They had a special place, a sorting area, where literally there were people separating the structural elements from human remains. And some of the stuff is commingled because these bodies were so torn up. You had the force of the inertial event that was taking place with the power of this thing collapsing. Then on those floors that were impacted by the fire and the jet fuel being set on fire, that was part and parcel of it as well. So it was just an ultimate nightmare scenario in that particular event.
Wow, thank you very much. And I just want to thank you again for being on. Again, Yeah C'mon Show 146. Now Brett Barney and Evan. Brett, you got a couple of questions for Joe.
Yeah,
I'm sitting here. You guys know that I wrote stuff before, and now I'm altering everything that I've written because my mind's going. The first thing is people asking you to come to an autopsy. All I can think about is, I used to talk with police officers, and they go, "Hey, if you, when I was doing news, if you ever want to come on a ride along or something like that," which is almost kind of what it sounds like. So is that the same thing with you guys, or is it a big no-no? You don't come to the autopsy?
Yeah, nowadays it's a big no-no. You don't, because of, first off, we live in such a damn litigious society.
True.
I mean, everything is dictated by attorneys. And, as my granddaddy said, wouldn't touch it with a vaccinated crowbar. It's such a nightmare relative to exposing anybody to anything. And it's funny, I remember a friend of mine that's passed on now, Dr. Parker, and he was actually ME for the state of Georgia and worked down at the GBI's office in Macon for years. He was a sweet old man, and learned a lot from him. And Dr. Parker, even at an advanced age, went back and did a fellowship in forensic pathology, if you can imagine that, at Dallas. And imagine this now, guys. He was working in Dallas during a time where, if you've heard the Scared Straight program, they would actually bring young offenders to the ME's office. They had a big glass wall, and they would put these kids against the glass, and Dr. Parker's in there with his team, and they're doing autopsies. And Dallas is a busy shop. I mean, there's always cases. Something's happening. And he would tell the story how when these kids would come through, they would take a body that was on the table and tie a fishing line to the right wrist. And so there would be somebody in the ceiling on the other side, and these kids are terrified anyway. And the body would be laying there like this. And Dr. Parker would sit there and look at them through the glass, and the assistants would turn and look at the kids, and they'd all wave, and the hand would go up in the air and do this on the body. You can't do that now, though, but the cool thing about it, I think, is a good dose of that reality. But, we tried that dose of reality back then. It didn't seem like it took, did it, guys?
No.
For whatever reason, we're still seeing issues. But yeah, I mean, for the purposes of education, it's great. And sadly, there are a lot of like medical schools out there that they'll do there's so few people that are actually doing gross anatomy. You'll have some medical schools in certain locations will have like multiple students just on one body. So I've worked at some morgues before where we would have medical students lined up just so they could come in and see us dissect a body, because they wanted that opportunity. And then you've got the morbidly curious that want to come in and see what it's like. And, you always have the story. I have tons of stories about people passing out at autopsies and cracking their heads, and it goes on and on and on. But it's not like it used to be. Back in the wild and woolly days, we'd have a room full of students. I remember a lady, she didn't bring them in for the autopsy, but there was a lady down in New Orleans that actually got to bring her seniors in a high school biology class to the morgue, and we had bodies laying out that had already been autopsied. There is no way they would let you do that nowadays.
That's like Ridgemont, Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah. Gnarly, man. Righteous bucks.
Yeah, right. Oh, crazy. What else you got, Brett?
Oh, I'll keep firing. I did send Evan a text. I realized I wasn't going through. I wrote, "You go, I go."
Well, go ahead, Evan.
Our normal back and forth.
I mean, Joe is not our plaything. We're like, you do Joe. But I think we all have questions, and I think the entire world is morbid to an extent. You look at pictures, you don't want to see them. I remember Faces of Death as a kid and things like that. And I did see my wife have 2 C-sections, and I was like standing up watching and doing everything. Didn't bother me a bit. But then I know some people see a little bit of blood and they'll faint. So I don't know if that means I could do what you could do or not. I think you obviously can't be freaked out by blood. But real quick before these two jump on you, and we have another 10 minutes, so hopefully you're enjoying this podcast, guys. But what is the worst? Has there ever been a situation where you're like, I can't do this one, or like it literally upset you or like grossed you out?
I don't know. There have been a number of cases. I think probably one of the things that really unnerved me quite a bit, and it was more of a sadness thing. And this actually occurred in Atlanta many years ago. And I had a lady that had a falling out with her father, and she's the one that actually found him deceased, and he had been down for, God, I don't know, probably 4 months maybe. And he lived in a little wood frame house. And she's the one that found him, and he was really infested, if you know what I mean. I mean, just he had cycled through so many life cycles of like flies and maggots and all these sorts of things. And she had fallen onto the floor with the body and held him. And the part of it is, I mean, it's horribly grotesque, but another part of it is there's a real sadness to it. When you think about, the disconnect that people have with families many times. And I remember interviewing her and speaking with her, and she had, decompositional fluid that was on her face and had maggot husks that were in her hair, and she's weeping. And, you sit there and, and I'm thinking there are these moments that happen, I think, in my field where you have this kind of this out of body experience, and you really ask yourself, is this really happening? Am I actually experiencing what my lying eyes are telling me I'm seeing? And, you try to convince yourself, like any human being, this isn't actually happening, but you know that it has. If you walk into a home, for instance, where somebody in the family has completely killed everybody and you're slipping in their blood. I remember, for instance, we had, and I don't know if you remember this, Steve, we had a mass homicide that took place the week before the Buckhead shooting, and it got lost in the news. And we had, I think, 8 people killed down in the Ben Hill area. I think it was Ben Hill. CNN had trucks down there, and
I was actually at the Buckhead shooting and saw the bodies.
Yeah,
I was on my way to work and heard about it like at 2:30. I got a call, and I went straight there and called into the regular guys from the location. It was
and it was a horrible event. And just a week before, we had this slaughter, and it was one of these little tiny houses. The family was like 8, maybe, and the house was like 1,100 square feet. And we had broken up into teams to work each body. There were kids hiding in the closet that had tried to get away. And we were like all covered in blood. We'd slipped in blood, and how do you take the measure of that, when you're an old man and you're looking back at your career and you're trying to tell your students that this is the reality of what you're going to be faced with, because you can't church it up enough. You shouldn't lie to them. You have to be honest with them and tell them what to expect out there. And still, if you tell them, it's like anything in life, you tell a kid what to expect, they're not going to believe it until they experience it. And then they'll come back to you and say, you weren't lying. This is horrible, but then there's something that kind of draws you back into it. And for me, it's always been the science.
That's great. Go ahead, Evan.
Yeah. This was just something I was curious about, because we have a lot of these like serial killer shows.
Yeah.
And it feels like we haven't had a serial killer in a while, at least not an iconic one. Do you feel like there's a reason for that? Is there a specific advancement? Kind of a silly question, but, I feel like 80s and 90s, there were a lot more like big serial killers in the news.
Like the Zodiac killer or anything.
Right, exactly.
Right. John Wayne Gacy, Dahmer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
these days, Bundy. You don't see many serial killers.
Well, BTK is probably the most fascinating to me out of all of them. For me, it is. I know the guys well. Before I was at Jacksonville State, I was actually a professor for about 9 years at the University of North Georgia up in Dahlonega. And I did a forensic conference. The first one that I did, I brought in 2 people. I brought in Roy Hazelwood, who was one of the founding members of the profiling unit with the FBI. And he specifically focused on his area of expertise was sexual sadism. I mean, that's what he did. And he's a sweet guy, man. I mean, really, you wouldn't imagine that, he investigated what he investigated. But the other person I brought in was a guy that actually put the cuffs on BTK. And to hear him tell that story, and, if you've ever been to Wichita, I've been to Wichita, and it's middle America, it's cornfields and wheat and whatnot, salt of the earth kind of people. And they'd been terrorized by this guy. And he didn't kill a lot of people, I guess, depending upon how you measure a lot. I mean, 1 is too many, but it took so long. And he was so methodical about it. And so they're out there and they're working. They're currently working. There are people that are being killed that we're probably not aware of. I think that some of it is some of them have become more sophisticated, perhaps.
Sure.
And I think that some of them have more of an awareness of the world that they indwell. They got this thing that's popping off out in California right now where they think this one guy is responsible for maybe 5. And they've got this kind of fuzzy image of him right now walking about. And
it's pretty early in the morning, right? People
or something. Didn't we have one in Tampa Bay like a year ago that was killing homeless?
Yeah, you had a guy that was killing homeless. There was also another guy that was doing out in Arizona about 3 years ago. It was doing random bus stop shootings, and we actually covered that on HLN, and I think on Nancy's show as well. And so that had occurred. Relative to, I had something cool kind of happen though, relative to the Golden State Killer. Paul Holes is known as the guy that kind of brought the whole thing together with DNA and forensic genealogy and all that stuff. But what was really cool, I was at CrimeCon where was I? We were in New Orleans, so that would have been 3 years ago, maybe. And I was actually on a panel with 4 of the surviving victims of the Golden State Killer. And it was an amazing thing to be around these women that had gone through. This guy was like just an uber sadist. I mean, he was absolutely horrible. He famously would take the male, if there was a female and a male, they would take the male, he would put the male nude on all fours and then take a china, a saucer and a china cup and put it on his back. And while he's raping the woman, and he would say, if I hear the cup rattle, I'm cutting your throat. Just let that sink in just for a second. And this guy was so methodical. He's a former police officer. He knew he was good at like things like what they used to call cat burglary. You know, he was a good window guy. He could get in and out, defeat locks and all those sorts of things. But just to sit there and hear these women tell their tale. And one of the people that was on the panel, she was not a victim directly, but at the time, I think she was 16. Her mother and her mother's boyfriend were killed, and she had left the night before angry at her mother. And she told her mother infamously, I think, I hope you die. And that was the last thing she said to her mother. And she went to a friend's house and spent the night. And the next morning, her friend's mom brought her back to the house, and there were cops outside the house, and a boyfriend and her mom and her mom's boyfriend were dead. And she was on the panel. It was just gut-wrenching to hear these stories. But, you know, again, that goes to kind of how we've advanced in forensics now. You begin to think about forensic genealogy, which I'm a very big proponent of individual rights. Some of the DNA stuff is a little bit scary for me when you start talking about data banking, and people say, well, don't you understand that there's all these cases that can be solved? Yeah, there are a lot of cases that can be solved, but, you know, you start to think about who can kind of pry into your
at the cost of what,
the very essence of who you are. You know, it's kind of terrifying.
All right, Brett, finish us off with a good question, and then finish us off.
I think I can only think of really 2 right now. The one would be, you see all these shows like Dexter, and, you know, these serial killer scripted type shows where, you know, he's injecting people in the neck, and they would see obviously a hole in their neck. One, do you see these shows and go, well, this is BS and this is BS as you're watching the show? Because I'm sure, like, if any of us watch something about radio, like Private Parts, they probably hit it pretty much on the head, the industry of radio. But there's probably some other stuff where we're going, okay, it's not like that at all. You would do this, this, or this. Right. And have you also ever been in the situation where you've had bodies coming in and you start noticing a trend, being like, wait, there's this identifier on this person that was also on this person and this person that maybe ended up in a serial killer type case?
Well, to the first part, and I'm not trying to sound like I'm holier now. I've literally for purposes, and a lot of it's a gag, I guess, on my part at this point. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I've never watched an episode of CSI ever. I walked in, my daughter, who's 27 now, was actually watching. I saw like a third of one, and I wanted to keep kind of clear of it to a great degree, because we have a thing called the CSI effect in forensics that actually is something they study that's in court. And because people talked about it so much, I never watched it. I stayed away from it. I have seen enough shows, though, relative to certain things. The biggest thing I hear about that show in particular and other shows, and I know that Hollywood's Hollywood, it's entertainment, it's what they do. I think that one of the things that a lot of my friends take exception with in forensics is that for every skill set that you see on a show like CSI, like whether it's ballistics or tool marks or a glass specialist or fingerprints, those people they're not artisans, but they're masters at their craft. Most of those people have graduate degrees and they're masters of those degrees. So just because I have a master's degree in forensic science doesn't make me an expert in ballistics. I would literally have to go to a firearms lab and sit at the feet of a master for 2 to 3 years before I'd be eligible for my boards. So the fact that they take people and they compress them into an amalgam of multiple disciplines is outlandish. You have people that can do all of these things, jack of all trades, master of none. And that animal doesn't exist in that world because you can't go sit on a stand and be a court qualified expert in every one of these areas. It's insane. It's just like there's certain skill sets that you guys have in broadcasting that, there are people that are really good at what they do. And, I know that people, have made glib comments about people in sales, for instance, in radios for years, but there are people that are really good in sales, I would imagine. You guys probably wouldn't touch those jobs because you don't really get it the way some people get it, or maybe some engineering aspects. It's the same principle, like you said, Brad. So that's part of it I take exception with, I think, to the best I can do it. One show that is laughable to me is Silence of the Lambs. It's hilarious to me. When Jodie Foster walks into the funeral home, the fact that you've got FBI agents actually doing forensic pathology work on the examination of the body and entomological work, and they take the stuff and put it under their nose, because what they don't tell you is, so now you not only do you have to smell a decomposed body, now you got to smell Vicks as well. You get used to the smell of decomp. That's what you do. You burrow in and you do it, and they're flipping the thing around, to one another in there. It's very laughable to us, when we see that. I think probably the movie Seven is pretty funny for us, when we see it. Great entertainment, but, it's just kind of the forensics aspect of it. To your other point about finding patterns, it's one of the things that we look for. I know of one case, particularly when I was in South Louisiana, we worked a series of cases that all involved ligature strangulation, and we saw a pattern where a guy was using actually a coat hanger, a wire coat hanger that he had fashioned as a garrote, and he would pick up prostitutes and he would choke them out. It was the same mark, and he would do it multiple times, so you could tell he was releasing it and then tightening it, releasing it and tightening it every time while he was assaulting them. And so you would see these multiple patterns on their throat that would appear. And so when you get two, you might not recognize it at first. You just think you have another prostitute that's died. But when you hit on that third and you start to see these same patterns over a period of weeks and months and extending out, you know that you're onto something at that point.
Oof. Wow. Very, it's just so interesting. And like you said, right now with Dahmer, which we referenced earlier on in the podcast, that's hot. I mean, 56 million people, man. Yeah. That's a lot of people watching that crap.
Yeah, there is.
Obviously, we're curious. And again, we look to see you. You're not a doctor, are you?
No,
You're just good old Joe Scott Morgan.
I am Joe Scott Morgan, dude.
Well, the stuff comes after his name, not before the name.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I thought we covered that.
No, we're the guys in my field are actually it's just like, again, you see on television where a forensic pathologist will go out to a scene of a death. They don't do that. There's less than 500 of them nationwide. There's more brain surgeons than there are forensic pathologists, because you're working for the government. Why do you go through all of that training to get paid? It's one of the few fields in medicine where the more training you get, the less you get paid. And it's hard work. You're going around testifying all over the state and whatnot. So there's very few of them. So the people in my field are the eyes and the ears of the forensic pathologist out in the field. We go, and coroners as well, we go out and gather information and then bring it in to the forensic pathologist. So when they're looking at the body, they can make these determinations about manner and cause of death. And then a few of us are also pathology assistants, which means that we work with the pathologist to do autopsies as well. So, for me, out of all the classes I've ever been in and everything I've ever done, the best classroom by far that I was ever in was the autopsy suite. I learned more in that environment than I ever did sitting around listening to old war stories, from other investigators, older investigators, and that stuff is all fine and good, but you learn more down in the dirt and the blood and the maggots and everything else in the environment, and looking past all the horror and getting down to the nitty gritty of the science.
And that has to be the worst part, the horror. And I guess you get numb to it to an extent. You're like, this is not going to be pretty, what I'm about to see.
Yeah.
And you let it go. And then you come home and you have friendships, relationships, and you just try to put it all aside, and, God knows my wife told me, leave Southside Steve at the door. I can't imagine what your wife or girlfriend would tell you.
She's made me change early in our marriage. She used to make me take my clothes off outside the house, because if you work at decomp, you can still smell it on the body of yourself, on your clothing. So my clothes would stay at the door. They'd be taken out and into the laundry room and washed out there.
Look at that. I used to do that.
And never washed with anybody else's clothes.
No, you're like, you're washing. Yeah. I'd be like, do not put my clothes in with Joe.
You're right. You're absolutely right. God's honest truth, man.
Well, again, it's time to finish this thing off. This has been a lot of fun. Look forward to hopefully seeing you around Headline News again, if we're both in there at the same time, or seeing you on television. And real quick, before we go into finish me off, I just want to know, how can people follow you, and tell us about your podcast where people can listen to that as well.
Okay. Yeah. The standard spiel. I'm on Twitter. My handle is kind of curious. It's at Medco, MEDCO, legal, LEGAL, death, at Medco Legal. That's my handle on Twitter. And I'm on Insta at Joseph Scott Morgan on Insta. And then my podcast is Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You can find it on iHeart, Apple. You can find it on Spotify, and it's on Audible as well, multiple other locations. I come out with a new episode every week. We've been at it. I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary. I think I'm 56 episodes in at this point, and we do a new case every week.
Wow.
A new
Happy
case every
anniversary.
week. Thank you very much. Yeah, it is, man. I didn't think I'd make it. It's hard, man. It is a hard gig. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's fun, but it is very difficult.
We know.
Yeah, I know you too.
We feel you. And that's great. And you're still teaching right now. You're at Jacksonville?
Oh, yeah. I'm an associate professor at Jacksonville State University in beautiful Jacksonville, Alabama. And we have a forensic investigative program. We're one of the oldest in the South. We've been around since we started forensics back in 1974, before it was cool. And we've got about 700 kids in our major alone. So we have a Center for Applied Forensics at our university. And all of us that are on faculty are either current or former practitioners. So all of our kids come in and they hear our war stories, but they hear practical application too.
And tell us about your book quickly, Blood Beneath My Feet.
Yeah,
what is this book for somebody that's looking for a good read?
Well, yeah, it is. And it's no longer in print. You can get it on Kindle, but I won Georgia Author of the Year back in 12 or 13, I think. But it is being adapted right now for television. Pilot script's already been done. Thank you very much. And we're very, very excited. Right now, we've got a producer for it, a very well-known producer, as a matter of fact, guy that is the producer for the current Jamie Foxx show series that's on, or a movie that just came out on Netflix. And he also did Get Out as well. So, so we're very excited about that. The writer is a friend of mine, writer-director who's from New Orleans, and brilliant, very talented guy. And he also owns the rights. You guys might, since Halloween's coming up, you might get a kick out of this. He owns the right to Gunter's book, who is Leatherface. And he's about to come out with, they're going to be making a movie called Chainsaw Confidential, and it's about the making of Chainsaw and about Gunter's life and how they took very little bit of money and turned it into the franchise that it is. It's not another Chainsaw movie. It's actually a dark comedy, as you can imagine. So
I love that.
I'm very excited to be partnered with him, and It'll be set in New Orleans, and I consider New Orleans home, and heading down this weekend, as a matter of fact. So I hadn't been home in a while, so I'm looking forward to going down there with my family. But
you ride safe, baby.
Yeah, brother. Sure will, man. Sure will.
Yeah. All right, Brett, finish us off. And again, this is one we're gonna push. This has been an absolute pleasure, and the curiosity is real, I think, for a lot of people of what you do and what you've done. And thank God there's people like you, for people that have been found, and anything that can trace it back to give that family that closure of exactly what happened to a loved one, how it went down, did they suffer, did they not, keeping it real, but finding that jackass that did it, and putting them away so they can't hurt anybody else. That's wonderful work. That's good stuff.
I truly think we could probably go like 2 more hours.
Oh, for real.
Like getting into nitty gritty. We might have to do another one.
Yeah, when the show comes out, we'll have to, for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm hey, look, make me Southside Steve forensic specialist. That's all I want.
Hey, by the way, if anything bad happens to me, you got me, babe.
Hey, there you go, baby. I got you, man. I got you.
All right, are y'all ready?
Let's finish this off.
So this is the name of the game, Joe Scott. I'm going to start reading the headline, and then I'm just going to stop, and you guys each get one guess to try and figure out how it finished. We're going to do 4 headlines that are all pretty quick. You got it?
Okay, got it.
All right, first one. Man charged at U.S. border with smuggling pythons in
rectum.
Man charged at U.S. border with smuggling pythons in
his colostomy bag.
A box of of ice cream sandwiches.
Okay, Evan, I like your creativity on that one, but in his pants.
These guys took the best ones already.
In his pants.
Yeah, colostomy bags was never going to come up if Joe Scott wasn't here, by the way.
You two would never have actually seen that before.
Hey, why not? Yeah, I muled in a couple of snakes. I mean, it was possible. I wasn't
there
trying
you go.
to be funny. All right. So go ahead. What's the next one?
According to a new study, men play extreme metal to
cartoons.
To perform better sexually.
To pass a kidney stone.
That's way good. I like Joe's. Although yours wasn't bad, Evan.
Apparently, we play extreme metal to impress other men.
Wow.
Oh.
So
okay.
Tell your boy the heater.
Gotcha.
All right. Man dies. I figured I had to throw a death one in. Man dies after falling from Myrtle Beach balcony while
doing shots of tequila.
Not bad. Not
Man dies from falling from Myrtle Beach balcony while trying to say hi to a friend. Like he's like, hey.
That's sad.
Careen's over.
That would be a terrible
wait on Joe's. What's Joe got? Here we go.
We'll see. Man falls from Myrtle Beach balcony while attempting to capture passing gull.
You guys were never.
That's funny.
You were never going to get this. Doing a handstand during Hurricane Ian.
Holy shit.
Man dies after falling from Myrtle Beach balcony while doing handstand during Hurricane Ian. I wrote this one up real quick in about 8 words. 34-year-old male from Ohio, 15th floor at the Patricia Grand Hotel.
Man, and wow. Joe, Evan, his last words. I mean, it was definitely, hey, watch this. Hey.
That's cool. That's cool, man.
Instagram this. Hey, you filming me? All right, go.
We're going to go viral on TikTok. All right, last one. Adult Entertainment Club's event in I'm going to start this one over. Adult Entertainment Club's event at Texas Golf Course surprises
members of Texas Golf Course.
I'd be pretty surprised if I walked on a golf course and it was Adult Entertainment Club out there.
That's what I'm saying.
The Knights of Columbus. It was their tournament.
The Little Sisters of the Poor.
There you go.
high school golf team.
Hey,
High school golf team shows up at 3:00 for practice.
There you go, baby.
Of an adult club's event at a golf course.
All right. And by the way, hopefully you watch this on YouTube just to see the wonderful picture of Joe. He looks fantastic. His pixels are like, I don't know, so much
crisp.
better than ours.
It's a crisp image.
Crisp. You look fantastic. It's like I could touch you, Joe.
Oh, Lord.
All right. It is show 146 of the Yeah C'mon Show. Special guest, Joe Scott Morgan. Get his book on Kindle. Follow this guy's podcast. Definitely check him out whenever he's on. If there's a big case, he's probably on it. He's one of the best at what he does. To Brett Barney, to Brando, it is the Yeah C'mon Show. Can I get a yeah, come on?
Yeah, come on, baby.